Okay, you're listening to Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hall Monitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Today on the show, we will be joined by Liz Hirsch, the director of the Office of Homeless Services in Philadelphia. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the new programs that are being proposed in this year's budget for homelessness in the coming fiscal year. A lot of interesting things, actually, that I was excited to discuss with her. And our own Lance Haver will be giving us an update on what's going on with SEPTA. Lance, how are you tonight?
I'm all right. I'm getting ready for real spring.
Yeah. It seems like it's getting started now. We had spring and winter, which is not a good thing, but here we are. So Lance, why don't you get us started and tell us a little bit about what's going on with SEPTA?
SEPTA had their virtual meeting where they were going to announce all of the changes that they made since they got all the feedback on the original changes that they made, which was the changes that they made after the original plan. So this is now the third rendition. The way it works is the SEPTA management hired this firm to redesign the bus routes. They did a little bit of research during COVID, used most of the data from the COVID riders, came up with a plan, got some feedback on the plan, refined the plan, and then went to get more feedback. But when they really went to get feedback, it turned out that the plan was really horrible for most riders. And they got a tremendous amount of pushback from certain areas and from certain elected officials. And Councilmember Johnson from the second council district held a hearing, and literally rider after rider showed up to say they didn't ask me, they didn't listen to me, they're not considering me. And the general manager of SEPTA said, well, we have to do something, and we're going to do something, but we know we didn't listen to you well enough. So they agreed at that point they were going to hold stakeholder meetings, and they were going to come back to the community groups and come back to the schools. One of the things that they acknowledged at the city council hearing was that the people who were redesigning the bus system, what they call the bus revolution, didn't take the time to meet with the school district. So one of the unbelievable facts was they were looking at ridership for different lines while the schools were closed. It was almost as if they didn't realize that the city of Philadelphia uses SEPTA as our school bus system.
Well, Lance, didn't the first meeting you went to, I think up in Manioc, they had a like one of the vice principals from the local high school come and say, I handle transportation here. I didn't know this was even happening.
That's exactly right. Right. The SEPTA people said, well, maybe we should have done a better job on reaching out to the schools. And this gentleman who lived in Roxborough stood up and said, I'm in charge of transportation for my school. I didn't know anything about this. No one spoke with me. I don't know what you're talking about. And a few of the older students, and these are people who are seniors, so they're probably not going to be using SEPTA for next year or by the time the changes come about. But a few of the seniors stood up and said, I don't understand why you didn't come to our school and ask us. Because at that point, SEPTA was recommending making transfers. The SEPTA proposal was to increase the number of transfers, believing that that would make things go faster. So they got this tremendous pushback. They said they were going to meet with the schools and with community groups, and what they committed to is holding stakeholders meetings. Now, I don't see any evidence of that. I don't think the timeline shows any evidence of that. But what they did do was come up with still another plan, and that's what they introduced last week. And I'm going to walk us through what's in that plan and kind of illustrate what's happening. But just those of us who really want SEPTA to do better and to be responsible to riders, and to understand that SEPTA really is a tremendous institution for the working poor. It's great for the environment. It's great for this downtown. It's great for our school students. It's even great for the drivers on the Schuylkill Expressway and on 95, because SEPTA takes roughly 500,000 people a day. And if half of those people bought cars and tried to get on 95 or get on the Schuylkill Expressway, the drivers who are currently using those highways would never be able to get any place. So SEPTA serves a tremendous number of constituencies. Yes, it's great for us who want to use it to get where we want to go, but it's our school bus system. It helps the downtown stores. It helps employers get employees to the workplace. It's one of the best things for the environment because buses and subways and trolleys take cars off the roads and clean the air. And as I said, it's even great for the drivers. So we know it's a wonderful institution, but we don't understand how SEPTA somehow isn't sensitive to the community that they represent. And let me give you a concrete example of that. The first neighborhood meeting that they're holding to talk about their new plan, the one they just introduced, is scheduled for the first night of Passover. Now, I recognize that only a third of the city is Jewish, but you would think that SEPTA, with all the days that are available to them to pick to hold these in-person meetings, would be sensitive to that and would not hold it on one of the highest holy days in the Jewish calendar. And it's that type of insensitivity, I think, that riders react to. And as we walk through what the SEPTA is saying and what they're doing, I think it's going to be evident. So if we can call up the slideshow and just go over it. So as I said, SEPTA introduced a new proposal. This is what they're saying they're going to hold meetings on to get more feedback on. But they did say, there are certain things that they learned from talking with us. And so this is a proposal. This slide shows the difference between the old proposal, the one they originally came up with, the experts came up with, and what they're now saying. So originally they were going to, right now we have 125 bus routes. The old plan was to knock that down to 99 bus routes. Now they're saying they're not going to do away with quite as many, but we're going to see that's not really true. But they're saying publicly that they're not going to do that. They're only going to cut back to 105. So they say they're only going to eliminate 20 bus routes. But the way they come to that number is not straightforward. They have what they call 8 microtransit systems, and they're counting those as new bus lines. And we're going to see that when we actually consider the bus lines, that's not what's happening. They say that they're going to increase the number of frequent bus routes. And you can see here, they have the on-demand microtransit routes, which don't exist now, and they're going to create 8 of them. Now, SEPTA is counting those on-demand microtransit zones as new bus lines, but they're not. They're much more like Uber or Lyft, where people somehow are supposed to get someplace and somehow call for a ride. It's not something that's ever been done before, and maybe it will work and maybe it won't, but it is not a bus. And finally, sadly, the acknowledgement that the number of hours, the amount of resources that SEPTA is going to allocate for the buses is the same, 3.8 million versus 3.8 million. Even though SEPTA has acknowledged that the train to King of Prussia has been canceled, they don't have to put money aside for that anymore. They don't have to consider funding for that anymore. They're not putting any of that money that was going to go to the rail lines into the bus services. So it's the same. They're not adding a single penny more, even though they have this money that they're now saving from the King of Prussia rail line being canceled. And they also have a very significant amount of cash in what they call their fare stabilization fund. So here's what SEPTA has said that they learned. Now, it's a little surprising that they had to learn this, but people don't want to make transfers. They rather be able to get on the bus and go where they're going rather than have to get off the bus, wait for another bus and get on that bus and then go where they are. It's not just a question of the cost of the transfer, because right now, if you have a key card, the first transfer is free. But it's also a matter of we don't want to wait outside in the cold. We don't want to have to worry about whether the other bus is going to be there when we expect it. And it increases the chance of having a delay by having to take 2 buses. So we wait for the first bus, and then we're forced to get off it, and then we have to wait for the second bus. And because SEPTA isn't adding any resources, there's no reason to believe that they're going to be any better at running the buses online. But they were surprised by that. And they've now acknowledged that that was a bad idea. And so now they're going to try and increase the number of rides, what they call one-seat rides. And what that means is without a transfer. So that's one of the lessons that they learned. Another lesson that they learned is that they ought to not eliminate as many bus routes. And what they said was they're going to show now how the routes go to the schools and community destinations. Now, again, why they had to learn that by paying consultants and having people who make a good living tell them this is what riders want is a little discouraging, because you would think that anyone who knows anything about public transit would know that we don't want to lose our bus routes. We want to keep our bus routes. We want to make sure we have the service we need. And they also committed to, and I highlighted this, to add new service where it makes sense based on feedback and ridership. And we're going to see that there's very little in the way of new service. What there is combining service. And when you combine service, what that means is you take two lines, you cancel one, and you expand the other to take some of what the first one was doing. And we'll look at that again when we get the breakdown of which buses have the most ridership and who SEPTA is listening to. The other thing they found out is, ready? Riders want to feel safe on SEPTA. Now, again, I'm not sure which consultant had to study this. I'm not sure who doesn't live in Philadelphia that doesn't know right now we are struggling with acts of violence, and it is scary, and we are desperate to come up with solutions. And for them to have a consultant say, I want SEPTA to be as safe as possible is a little scary. The good news is they acknowledge that now. They acknowledge that when they first did the plan, they didn't include making it safer. Now they do say they're going to continue to focus on safety and security so everyone feels comfortable using SEPTA. There's nothing in the plan that says how they're going to do that. And again, it's very difficult to figure out what they're actually suggesting, because they're saying they're not going to add any financial resources. So I don't know how they're going to do this, but at least they're saying it. And, you know, as the old expression goes, if you can't acknowledge a problem, you can't solve it. And at least acknowledging it is a huge step forward from where we were before people came out to the hearings, before people started to protest the cuts. So when we're going to look at what SEPTA has in the proposal, I want to call people's attention to a few things. SEPTA has a list of all the bus lines, and it's a very complicated slideshow, very hard to understand all the different things. And what makes it even more difficult is the language they use. So, for example, they're consolidating the Route 1 bus. So consolidation, what does that really mean? You know, normally that means you're putting it together somehow. But that's not what SEPTA means when they say consolidated. What SEPTA means when they say consolidated is they're going to eliminate it and get people to use a different bus. And when they say they're going to combine routes, again, it's not clear what that means when you talk about buses. When you're cooking, when you're doing other things, combining is mixing them together. But obviously you can't mix two bus lines together. So when SEPTA says they're going to combine bus lines, what that means is they're going to eliminate one of the routes and do something to the other route somehow to make it the same as if they're two routes. So that's kind of the language that they're using that makes it hard for riders to follow and makes it really difficult, as we'll see, for people to participate fully and let them know. So here's a review of the new changes. There are 22 routes that are being consolidated. And again, what that means is 22 routes are being eliminated. I've listed all the routes. We'll put this in the newsletter so people can follow, and we'll link to what these actual routes mean. Most riders know their route and don't know the other routes. So for example, if I ride the 47, I know what this means when they say they're going to consolidate the 47M. So the two 47s, one goes to slightly farther. When they say they're going to consolidate it means they're going to eliminate the one that goes farther. That's their idea of consolidation. Same thing's true. They have 12 routes that are going to be combined. And that doesn't mean anything other than they're going to eliminate one and ask the other to do some of the things the first one did. Same thing, the 8 and the 70 are going to be combined. The 8's going to be gone. The 70 is going to do something extra. And we see that it's, again, very difficult for people to understand, because you have to look at a very confused map to understand if you rode the 8 and it's being eliminated and the 70 is supposed to take its riders to where the 8 used to. It's not clear what's happening. And again, when we send out the newsletter, we'll link to that, and it will be easier for people to follow. But as easy as we can make it, I will still say it's very, very difficult for people to understand. And finally, the 10 new routes. Well, SEPTA themselves say 8 of the 10 are microtransit. So they're not new bus routes at all. There are only 2 new bus routes. And if you're going to count the microtransit routes, what you're going to see is 7 of the new, quote unquote, new routes are in the suburbs and 3 are in the city. And I've listed all of them. Again, very hard to follow that this evening, but we'll send out the newsletter with all that information. So when we look at it, SEPTA says they're going from 125 existing buses to 105. But when we look at what they actually tell us in the specifics, they say they're going to eliminate 22 bus routes outright. And they're going to lose 6 bus routes by combination. 8 of the new 10 buses are not buses at all. There's this new idea called microtransit. So the net losses are 28. Then we get 2 new bus lines. So there are 26 lost bus routes. SEPTA says there are only 20. That's simply not true. There is no way, based on what SEPTA's proposal is, to come to the conclusion that we're going from 125 to 105. What we're really doing is going back to the original 99 that they projected. So again, you take 125, you subtract 26, the updated draft network number actually gets to 99. The only way they can say that this is different is by suggesting that the microtransit somehow are real bus lines, and they're not. Why is it that SEPTA is having such a difficult time figuring out what to do and how to service the community? And what I've put up is, as of 2020, this is a list from SEPTA of which buses have the greatest riders. And it's a comprehensive list. It's a little difficult to read on the screen, and I'm not going to ask anyone to read it on the screen. I just want everyone to know that we know this. This is not magic. This is not something that's unknowable. We know, based on SEPTA counting the riders through the fare box, which buses have the most riders and which have the fewest. Now, you would think that you would want to hear from the majority of the riders and have the buses that have the most riders be the most represented at all the public meetings, because that's kind of how democracy works, right? Most people voting get to elect the person they want. If your candidate gets 4 votes and my candidate gets 1,000 votes, my candidate is the candidate that serves in office. But SEPTA doesn't make any attempt to get a representative group. What they do is rely on the internet and rely on these Zoom meetings, which they know, and we all know, means that there's a certain segment of us that are not going to participate. And so they're hearing from a very small percentage of the riders who ride the lines with the most ridership. And it's going to be obvious when we kind of look at that breakout. So SEPTA, when you go to their Zoom meetings, they ask you the question, what bus do you ride the most? And they had almost 1,000 people at the meeting. And here you can see the breakdown, the 32, the 48, the 27, all the way down to the 47, which only had 51 riders. So if you look at this, you would think that the 32 has about the largest ridership of any bus line in the city. But you would be wrong. When we actually look at which bus lines have the largest ridership and how many of those riders showed up to be heard, we'll see a very different story. So the 47 is the bus with the largest ridership. Now, it is true that the L and the Broad Street line have more riders than any of the buses. I haven't included them on this chart because they're not being affected by any of this, and they're just not bus lines. So the 47 bus has the most riders according to that chart I put up before. According to SEPTA, nobody who attended their meeting rides the 47. Or if they did get anyone, they didn't list them. The second most ridden bus is the 18. No one showed up at the meeting. The G, third most. No one showed up. The 11, the fourth most. The 13, the fifth most. Now the 23 is the sixth most. And the 23 is the old 23 trolley, rides up and down Germantown Avenue. It no longer goes all throughout the city. It's been broken up between the 23 and the 45. But as you see, it's the sixth most ridden bus in the city. And they did have people who rode that attend the meeting. 44 people on a list of 18 groups that had ridden the buses. They were the 17th group. So we see again here, the most heavily ridden buses had almost no representation. No one showed up. And even when we get to the 23, which is the sixth most ridden bus, it was the 17th lowest in the list of people attending the meeting to talk about what they're doing to the 23. Again, the 36, the seventh most, no one was there to speak for it. The 34, no one was there for speaking for it. And the 52, which is the ninth largest ridership, had 152 people attend. So you can see the outreach is skewed. Where most of the riders are, they're not being reached for whatever reason. They're not participating. They're not talking about what they want to see. And so when we go down the list, what we understand is SEPTA has getting a very narrow focus group, and they are limiting the feedback. 25% of the attendees ride the 32. The 32 is one of the most changed routes. No one at that meeting, no one at any of the meetings has asked, if you ride the 32, how do you feel about the changes we're suggesting? So unlike the others where nobody showed up, and SEPTA may have made a decision, well, if no one showed up, we're not going to ask how people feel about the changes. But here, 25% of the people attending the meeting rode the 32. And SEPTA didn't bother to ask, didn't do a poll, didn't ask, didn't do any feedback at all. These meetings were all one direction. SEPTA tells you, this is what we say. You can add your questions into the bottom of the screen, but one of the SEPTA staff or one of the consultant staff decides which questions to ask. And someone who's attended many of the public meetings and attended the city council hearing, I'm somewhat surprised by what questions SEPTA gets asked, because those are not the questions riders are asking for the most part. And I believe that the SEPTA staff or the consultant staff, they have to limit the questions because there's so many people who are concerned, but they don't want people to be able to say, well, why are you changing the 32? They want to have people talk about, well, why does the bus stop at every corner? Why doesn't it stop at every other corner? Which almost no one at the public hearings or at the public meetings is demanding, but it's what the SEPTA consultants want to do. So there are a number of events that are coming up. And again, we're going to put this out in the newsletter and link to it. And it is an opportunity for you, if you ride SEPTA, if you care about SEPTA, if you're a store owner, if you're an employer, if you are in a home and school and you're concerned about what's happening, you can come to one of these meetings. Now, these are what are called pop-ups. And what that merely means is SEPTA is going to show up with an easel and some charts and some staff people, and you're supposed to ask questions. But there's no formal presentation, and there's no way to know whether what you say matters. But more importantly, there's no way for you to know what other people are thinking and hear back. So everyone, of course, wants to protect their ride, but you're not hearing from other people. So for example, on the 4 bus, which is the bus that rides up and down Broad Street, SEPTA says the following. They say it's going to be less frequent, and then they also say the frequency will be the most frequency of any bus line. So there's no way to say to them in any of these type of pop-ups, what are you doing to us? Why do you say one place it's going to be less frequent, in other places you say it's going to be as frequent as any of the bus lines anywhere? But these are still events. There's something that I would recommend people who have concerns or not sure about how they're going to get home or their kids are going to get to school go to. These are, again, called pop-up events. There's not going to be a formal presentation, but it will be a chance for you to talk to some of the SEPTA staff. Hopefully some of the senior staff will show up, but of course we don't know that. Now, here's where, again, it just gets really strange. SEPTA is going to have what they call in-person community meetings. And these are probably, we don't know for sure, but these are probably going to be formal presentations. So SEPTA is going to stand up in front of a room. There are going to be chairs for people to sit in. They're going to go over, hopefully, the bus lines in that neighborhood, what's happening to them, ask questions, and then ask people for feedback. As I said, SEPTA seems to be so out of touch that the first meeting is the first night of Passover. Now, I don't believe that anyone does that on purpose. I think that would be unfair. But the insensitivity to not look at a calendar, almost every calendar we look at shows that that's the first night of Passover. And for those of us who practice Judaism, that's the night of the first Seder. That is typically the night that you are obliged to be with your family to celebrate, or you want to be with your family and celebrate, or it is the night you choose. Now, there are more nights of Passover, but historically, it's the first night that most people have their Seder. So having it that Wednesday really makes it very difficult for people who practice Judaism or celebrate Judaism or are in families where people practice or celebrate Judaism to attend. Passover starts at sundown. The meeting goes from 6 to 8 p.m. It's one of those things where you look at it and you go, did you mean to insult all the people of Jewish faith? I don't believe that. I don't believe they meant to, but it's just an indication of how out of touch. Now, if I've gone through that, you can see that there's basically meetings every Wednesday for the rest until May. And this is a much better opportunity for people to hear what's happening in their neighborhood, what's going forward. And with any luck, SEPTA will acknowledge their mistake for this Wednesday and they'll reschedule it. I have asked them for a comment about that. I have not gotten a response yet. But unfortunately, I don't believe that the web page and the emails and the phone number that they give us to call are actually monitored on a daily basis. So even though I called and I left a message and I sent an email, I haven't heard back and I'm not really expecting to hear back. So that's where we are. There are also additional webinars. Now, these are not, in my opinion, these are not the best way to interact with SEPTA, but it is a way to get more basic information. And the first one is this Monday, and that's for South and North Philadelphia, which again is a somewhat unusual combination. They don't put South Philadelphia and Center City together. They don't put North Philadelphia and Center City together. They put West Philadelphia and Center City together. I'm not sure they're thinking on that, but that's how they do it. And you have to have a computer. You can do it online with your phone, but it's very difficult to follow the maps and the diagrams and everything else on your phone. So pretty much if you don't have access to a computer, you're shut out of these webinars. Maybe you can get the public library or somebody in your neighborhood to host it and do a group thing, but SEPTA, in my opinion, should have done that. They easily could have gone to all the rec centers in these areas and said, hey, can you bring people together for these nights so people who don't have access to the internet or don't have a computer at home and are doing all these things on their phone can have access and see what the root cuts are and what's happening. So that's where we are. SEPTA is, again, this is the third rendition of a plan. I believe there'll be more changes coming up. And I want to point out that all of our viewers and our listeners, the people who have responded to Hall Monitor's email who showed up, have won significant concessions. And SEPTA really has made very significant changes to their plans. So they were going to eliminate what was called the 27. That was the route from Roxborough-Matayunk into South Philly, which a lot of our school students use to get to Kappa, to get to Bodine, to get to Masterman, to get to Central. They put that back. They were going to cut back on the what they call the 4 bus, which is a bus that runs up and down Broad Street from south to north Broad Street. And they were telling people who were using the bus, we're going to cut back on that because we want you to use the Broad Street line. And when riders said, first of all, the Broad Street line isn't handicap accessible in most of the stations. And even where it is, unfortunately, the elevators or the escalators often don't work. And that's not really a solution. And many of us now no longer feel safe riding riding the Broad Street line or the L. And SEPTA management or their consultants heard that and put back the bus line. Another example was the 23 and the 45. Now these are again, that used to be a unified routes. It used to be the longest trolley ride in America, but those are routes that people use to go shopping. For example, in people who don't want to shop at a supermarket, would rather shop at Reading Terminal, either to save money or because they like the personal way of shopping. Those were routes that the working poor were using and school students were using. SEPTA's original plan was to cut that back to once an hour. They've reinstituted that, so there'll be no cuts in that line. So we know when people show up, and we know when the community, through their elected officials, complain and make demands that they're met. The reason, in my opinion, the reason why in Roxborough, Mattiunk was so successful at saving their buses was Councilman Jones, who represents that district, and the ward leader, Lou Ager, and their newly elected state rep, Tariq, all showed up at the meeting and made those demands, and the SEPTA responded. In South Philly, Council Member Johnson and State Senator Saval were active in supporting the efforts to save their bus lines. And so that's why I believe the 45 was saved, and the buses that go through the center through South Philly on the west side of Market Street. Those were all because people contacted elected officials, because elected officials got involved. We still have a ways to go, and I'm still somewhat horrified that SEPTA hasn't taken the time to set up these meetings, but continues to make new plans. And unfortunately, what that does is it puts riders in a position to fight against SEPTA. Instead of working with riders and seeking information, what they've done is they've made us the enemy. They said, we're going to take your bus line away from you, and now you have to show up and fight for it. I believe everyone knows SEPTA can do better. And I believe that most people share the opinion that we should be supporting continual improvement. So the idea of looking at the bus lines and asking the question, how can we make them better, is a very healthy impulse. It's something that we should support. But what unfortunately happens is that's not SEPTA's way of proceeding. Their way of proceeding is in a dark room in the back place. They say, here's our plan. They bring it out and they say, what do you think? And people then say, well, you didn't ask me. It doesn't work for me. And I'm fighting you. And now I don't want any change, because the choice is no change or what you recommend. And that neither of those are necessarily the best thing. Some changes are good. One last point. There's no evidence in any of this plan that SEPTA has met with the disabled community to talk about what these changes mean to disabled riders. And, you know, we know that the subway is not always available. We know that the L is not always available. We know that the trolleys are not always available. We know that the subway surface cars are not always available. So the buses are what disabled riders are usually relying upon. And you would think that there would be at least one meeting dedicated to hear from the disabled community, what is it that we SEPTA can do to serve you better? And unfortunately, if that's happening, it's not happening in public, because there is no such posted meeting. And what it means is the disabled community, which has fought a tremendous fight to get the wheelchair accessible buses, and in the bad old days had to get the wheelchairs in front of the buses to stop them so that they would be seen and they would be picked up. Unfortunately, they're being put back into that role, and there's no reason for it. There's no reason why SEPTA can't think about reaching out to people before they announce the plans and creating what they promised, which is stakeholders meetings, So people had a chance to talk about what it is they like and what it is they didn't like, and what really makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And if we think about it again for more than 2 minutes, the question is really about the role of an expert in our society. So there are some people who believe the role of an expert is to tell the rest of us how to live and what to do. And there are other people who think the role of an expert is to ask people, what is it that you would like? What is it that would serve you best? Tell me, and then let me take your concerns into account and come up with a plan and see if you approve that plan. Now, those are two very different models. And one model, the top-down model, unfortunately, is what we often get. And the bottom-up model is what we really need, because then we're not fighting SEPTA, then we're partners with SEPTA, and it becomes a much better institution. Again, we desperately need SEPTA. It is a great institution for the working poor. It's a great institution for cities. It's great for the environment. It's great for downtown. It's even great for the drivers, as I said. 500,000 more cars on the Schuylkill Expressway or 95. You might as well give up on driving. Because the truth is, a large number of SEPTA riders are the working poor, and they're not buying brand new cars. They're buying cars, unfortunately, that will struggle to work. And so every time you put a car that's at risk of breaking down on the highway and it breaks down, you have these tremendous problems. And that's my report. I'm hoping that SEPTA will give us a little more information going forward, get a little more clarity on what's actually going on the 4 bus, whether they're cutting back or they're not cutting back, on how long the wait is and what's really happening with the 32.
All right. Well, Lance, thank you so much for doing that and keeping us updated on that. And there's still ways to go, like you said. We're going to have these meetings through the spring, and there's going to be more after that. So
there will be SEPTA's budget hearing, which will get a better chance to ask questions. How much did all this cost, and how much money is available to make SEPTA safer? And we've been told that SEPTA is very concerned that the ridership has fallen off and won't grow, and as a result, they're not spending any money. And I think at those hearings, we'll have a chance to say, well, maybe if you spent money and you made SEPTA safer and people felt more comfortable, ridership would go up, and then you wouldn't have the deficits you're projecting. So it's kind of a chicken and egg, and we will watch the hearings and we will watch some of the new events as they come forward. I will be at a Seder dinner, so I will not be at that event.
Okay. Well, Lance, thank you as always for that. So now we have something. We have an interview with Liz Hirsch from the Office of Homeless Services. Now, typically we have audio and video. Today we just have audio because this is recorded this morning in the hallway outside the City Council chamber, because that was the only place we could connect in the last couple of weeks. But we still did it. I still think it's a lot of interesting information and a lot of positive information about some of the funding that's coming to help the homeless population here in Philadelphia. So here's our interview with Liz Hirsch.
Okay, Liz Hirsch, thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
So before we get into some of the things we discussed before we got here, tiny home village and all that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Liz Hirsch. I'm the director of the city's Office of Homeless Services. Prior to coming to the city with the mayor, I ran the Housing Alliance of Pennsylvania, which is the statewide affordable housing advocacy organization. And we won the first state housing trust fund, which this year will have $60 million for affordable housing.
Tell us a little bit more about that. How does that work?
Well, it's a basically, it's a scrape basically from real estate, from transfer taxes, and it's administered by the Housing Finance Agency, and it supports all kinds of development, preservation of affordable rental throughout the state of Pennsylvania.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about the Office of Homeless Services.
Okay, yeah. Well, we're the city entity charged with providing the leadership, coordination, planning, systems, all the support for the city-funded network of homeless services. And our mission is to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring.
So I think when we talk about homelessness, people have an idea. But what is the actual definition of homelessness? And does that include people who are home insecure as well?
In terms of HUD, which is our regulatory body, that's a federal agency, no. But that's really much more the affordable housing world, that in Philadelphia is under planning and development. We work mostly with people who are imminently homeless, means, they could fall off the cliff tomorrow or today, and people who are literally homeless, meaning that they have no place to live that's fit for human habitation. So that would include cars, abandoned buildings, sidewalks, and it also does include shelters and transitional housing. Because it's not a permanent address, we still consider that to be homeless.
About how many people would you work with in a year?
Well, last year, so what we would say 2022, it was a little over 18,000 people, between 18 and 19,000 people who touched our system. And about 12,000 of those actually came into a shelter. And then the others would have been in some kind of long-term housing program or gotten homelessness prevention services. So it's quite significant. It's a lot of people. We really think of it kind of as the bleeding edge of housing insecurity. So, people who, their car breaks down, they have an unexpected medical bill, they get laid off, all kinds of things happen to people, and they just, can't stay where they are.
So that number, that's a huge number. Is that a normal year, or is that?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a pretty normal year. Pre-pandemic, we had gotten up to about 20,000. During the pandemic, our numbers actually went way down. We think that the economic stimulus payments that people were getting, the child care tax credit, all of those things had a dramatic impact. And we were able to provide more housing resources because of all the extra COVID resources. But unfortunately, this is a return to normal. Plus, we had the eviction moratorium for a while there, and we had all that federal rental assistance, like literally over $100 million. All of those things made a difference. And frankly, Lawrence, homelessness is a money problem.
Yeah.
People don't have, it's a lack of affordable housing. People can't afford to pay the rent.
Right. So when we're talking about 12,000 people last year,
It's been a night in a shelter.
so how many, I mean, maybe this is really hard to know, but how many homeless people are there in the city generally?
Well, there's a couple different ways to count. The official count is called the point-in-time count. It's conducted nationwide in every community the last Thursday in January, other than last year because of COVID. It was last Thursday in February. So it's an annual count, which we do. In that count, and based on that count, then we measure whether how we're doing year to year, and then how we're doing compared to other cities. So, for example, between 2018 and 2022, unsheltered homelessness, according to the point-in-time count, dropped by 27%. Overall homelessness, unsheltered and sheltered, dropped by 22%. Family homelessness dropped by 42%. So we saw significant drops. And that doesn't mean that new people aren't becoming homeless. And that's really the big thing, is we don't control the inflow, right? So that's the job market, the housing market, the educational system, the economy, the political system, all of those things, that the carceral system, healthcare, all of those things leave people in a situation where they become homeless. And we're really the response, the crisis response system. So kind of when all else fails, people end up being homeless. It means a lot of other things have gone wrong on the way. And about 70% of the people who entered our system in 22 were unknown to our system, at least for the prior 2 years. So that was a lot of new people who are coming in. We'll see new parents who have either the first or second child in the household, just really can't sustain them economically. We'll see people coming out of the correctional system, people coming out of healthcare systems. And we're also seeing a graying of the homeless population. So we're seeing more people who are older.
And people coming out of foster care as well. I understand.
Yeah, there's, and I think it's less about directly out of foster care because young people are, should have a permanency plan. And we just got some new resources. The city just got 50 new vouchers for youth aging out of homelessness. But it's, what happens when they're 20, 21, 23, without that, this is generational poverty by and large. So, when my son at 23, was unemployed, he could come home.
Yeah.
But if the family doesn't have those resources, or the family is disconnected, then they may fall back in. So it's really that sort of, the journey of young adulthood that is very difficult for people. Thankfully, we just got an $8.8 million grant, competitive grant called the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project from the federal government. And so we are developing a coordinated community plan to address youth homelessness that is actually being led by young people who themselves have lived experience of homelessness. Once that plan is approved by HUD, then we'll put out an RFP, and we expect to put over $8 million on the street next year to address homelessness among youth and young adults.
Now, do you find that if you don't have people who have experienced this themselves, the outreach is harder to bring people into the system?
I think it's a both and.
Okay.
Our outreach teams do have a lot of peers on them, and our staff and the staff of our provider network definitely have a lot of people who have lived experience. And so that's very, very valuable because they get it. At the same time, there's a lot of wonderful social workers and case managers who just care deeply, have a lot of skills. So, I think there's no one size fits all. It's an all hands on deck kind of thing.
So in this year's budget, it seemed like the mayor had mentioned a couple of priorities that were really interesting and really exciting.
Oh, good.
One thing that I thought that really stuck out to me was the tiny home village idea. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Yeah, so the city is piloting two different models of tiny homes. The one that the Homeless Services is taking the lead on is going to be called Sanctuary Village. And it's going to be 26 tiny, they're bedrooms that are disattached. So they don't have running water. The bathrooms and kitchens are central or communal, but they do have, HVAC and electricity and all of that. And they'll be on around kind of a common area. And they'll be for people. The first one will be for women, and people will be able to stay as long as they want, but it'll be temporary housing, and then they can move into another place. So it's basically like a private bedroom in a community setting. And what really sold me, and I was not an early adopter, I was very skeptical because, Philly has tiny homes. We have row houses. They're 900 square feet, their original tiny home. But when I visited Seattle, and Sanctuary Village is based on the Seattle model, and I talked to the residents in a couple of the different villages, everybody said this was the thing that helped them come in. And so we really thought, let's give it a shot. And so we're really excited, and because it's new, it's hard, So we've been working for a couple of years now to kind of pave the way to make this happen. Yeah, but we're really excited about it. And then there will be another tiny home village that'll be different. This will be full apartments, but I think 500 to 600 square feet, and manufactured housing, and that'll be in West Philly. And that's more of a development project that's underway.
Oh, that sounds great. From what I understand, I'm not an expert on this in any means, but what I've read about it, it's almost a universal success, right? Like there aren't any downsides of this yet that anyone's noticed.
Not so far as we know. I mean, I think what we're really taking a look at is cost benefit. We run 42 basically shelters already, and we have a lot of non-congregate shelters. And Philly has a lot of housing stock, so we have to balance out, building on a vacant lot, build, manufactured housing, stick built, so we're looking at all of those things. So this is why it's a pilot. But yeah, we're really excited about it. We think it's very promising.
And for people who maybe have experiences with the shelter system or afraid of the shelter system, this is like a much better option.
Yeah, this may work better for them. Although I will tell you that our shelters are safe.
Of
It's
course.
remarkable. There's a lot of, but not everybody is going to thrive in a congregate setting.
Right.
And so, we like to have shelters that are non-congregate. I think
Mm-hmm.
the more choices we have, because people who are experiencing homelessness are still people.
Mm-hmm.
They still make choices, they still have preferences. And we feel like when people don't come into the homeless system, it's because we are not doing our job of meeting their needs.
Mm-hmm.
And we never ever talk about resistant clients or anything. That's really old school. It's really incumbent upon the systems to do what people need so that they will come in. There's no forced march into shelter. You
Mm-hmm.
have to, or any other services, people have to choose it.
So is groundbreaking on these tiny home developments going to happen next year, do you think?
Yeah, we're hoping so. We're arcing towards this year, 2023.
Oh,
So
good. Okay.
yeah, cross your fingers, pray, whatever.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. So what are some of the other the initiatives that you're looking for fiscal year 2024?
Well, probably the most significant is 100 new supportive housing units. We have about 5,100 in our inventory. We've grown it by about 10% over the last 5 years. And this has really been one of the hallmarks of this administration. And it's really quite simple. Housing ends homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
Shelters save lives. Housing ends homelessness. And so as we are able to add deeply affordable housing for people, that is how we see the reduction in the numbers of homeless people. And more importantly, that's the foundation that people need for everything else, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's recovery,
Yes.
health, family reconciliation, education, employment. All of those things you have to have housing first.
Yeah.
So the investment in housing first by the city is the most important thing.
Well, and that's what it is. When we talk about, the crime issues and the violence, from my point of view, it's poverty. And then how do you stop poverty? The first step is stable housing, right? So it all kind of fits together.
I agree.
Do you have any concerns about just using the University City townhomes as an example? That's going to be sold to a developer. There's going to be issues there. Other places in the city are probably going to have a similar fate as these. And I'm not 100% sure exactly how the mechanics work, but I know some of them are able to be sold after
Yes, right.
40 years.
There's a compliance period.
Yeah.
And when that ends, they can be sold to market.
So is that something that, from your point of view, you have to keep an eye on to understand maybe we're going to have more people coming into our system that we have to work with?
Well, we do worry. We worry
Mm-hmm.
a lot about that. Anything that can be done to increase the supply of affordable housing is good. I think that City Council and the mayor have really been activist on that front, whether it's home repair and basic systems repair, whether it's development, preservation,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's inclusive zoning, inclusionary zoning. All of these things make a difference. The more stability we can have for people with low and moderate incomes, that and raising wages, and
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things we probably don't talk about enough is the income side. About half the people in our system report zero income.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then a lot of our folks are on disability, which is about $800 or $900 a month.
Right.
There's no such thing as a place you can rent for that amount
Right.
of money. So I think that some of the federal funds for people for income, if we double disability income or Social Security, we see a lot of people on Social Security, $10,000, $11,000 a year. There's just no place to live. So it's a both and. It's the supply of affordable housing and making sure that's available, and also making sure it's not just in one neighborhood or certain neighborhoods, but really everywhere, integrated. So it's part of communities. So we have that kind of vertical economic integration where you have people who have modest incomes and people who have, higher incomes all together. That's the best thing for everybody. But it's also assuring that people have enough money to live on. For example, the governor proposing a much higher minimum wage. All of those things help. So the family economy is not quite so fragile.
Mm-hmm. So how can people like me help the homeless? What can I do?
We encourage people to get involved. Certainly, making sure that their elected officials know that this is something really important and that they prioritize it, and then volunteer and donate. We have 70 or so homeless service organizations listed on our website. They're all over the place. They're easy to find. If they had more money, they could serve more people. And if they have more volunteers and supplies, they could serve more people and have a bigger impact. So anything that you can do to help these organizations who are doing the real work on the ground, that it feels like a little, but it's big.
Mm-hmm. And where can people find that information?
So our website, go to the phila.gov homeless services, and the list of our providers is there, or just Google homeless services.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Let's do that, and I'll edit it in.
Okay.
All right, we would like to thank Liz Hirsch for being with us here on WPPM 106.5 Hall Monitor. Before we go, I'd like to talk a little bit about the budget. The budget hearings began this week. They started yesterday and are going today. And the next week, we'll have hearings on Monday and Tuesday. After that, it'll be Tuesday and Wednesday up until through May. So that's sort of where we are right now. Then after that, the budget gets passed. It usually goes into June and takes a while to get done. But this year, we're talking about a $6 billion budget. It's more money than we've ever had in the budget before, with more revenue than we've ever seen before. So a lot to talk about. We've had 2 full days, and I'll say that yesterday was more of the low-key day. Today was more of the what's going on day, and that had to do mostly with the Office of Property Assessment. We covered this extensively on Hall Monitor last year and have been since then. That property assessments have gone way up. We've had discussions with Revenue Department and with the Office of Property Assessment about this. And City Council today had a lot of questions. And some of the things that we're going to cover this in the newsletter on Friday. We'll have a lot more information about this. We'll have a rundown of what was discussed and who asked questions. But there was a lot that happened. And I just want to mention a couple of things here. And just so people know, and we'll put this in the newsletter as well, if you still haven't gotten on the homestead program, if you're eligible for the senior tax freeze or the LOOP program, these are great programs that help lower your tax bill. So just so you know, there are 234,790 people who use the homestead exemption citywide. I think it could be a lot more than that. So that's something you really need to look at. There are just over 14,000 people in LOOP, the long-time owner occupancy program, and there are just over 19,000 in the senior tax freeze. I think more people could be in those programs. They're really worth checking out. We're going to put more information about that in the newsletter this Friday, so you can take a look at it for yourself, share it with your friends, make sure people know about it. We're going to have more information about what went on in these hearings. There's all kinds of information about tax rates. I think that's really interesting, what's happening with that. So we're going to have more information about that. And we'll have more information next week on Hall Monitor as we talk more about these things. Lance, thank you as always for your great report and thorough report.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with Denise Clay Murray next week. So thank you all for watching.
Great interview with Liz.